What's going on, everybody? It's your boy Moonshine. I hope you're having a good one. I'm doing all right. All things considered, and the topic of this video notwithstanding, I've been having a pretty decent week. Don't have a whole lot of complaints. Had to get a bunch of teeth work done or tooth work done. Had a bridge put in this week, and despite that, siphoning a bunch of money out of my wallet, it's kind of cool to have more teeth. So I mean that's a good thing, I suppose. But I was going to do a more positive video today, and I'm still going to do that. But I figured I would cover what would be considered, I guess, the elephant in the room. Um, and as you can tell by the shirt and the background, and the fact that I do all sorts of wrestling and metal content, this would be a big thing with me. That both Ozzy and Hulk Hogan passed away this week. Ozzy on Tuesday. Just found out Hulk Hogan died earlier today, and both suck all the ass. I mean, it's just that's rotten. Like, not to get too histrionic, but it's almost kind of like, can you just you want to take Arnie too? You want to take Schwarzenegger from me too, and ruin my entire childhood? Yeah, that's kind of how I feel about this situation. Shred, that was for you, buddy. But yeah, man. We'll go into a whole history lesson of Ozzy's life and career. Same with Hogan. Just kind of go over it briefly, and then kind of what they mean to me. Um, you'll see 1,001 different people doing videos if you haven't already. I mean, I've seen a ton of them, especially with Ozzy. You'll see a bunch of people doing it with Hogan, and I'm sure a ton of them will be much better than mine. But I'll give you my opinion nonetheless. But of course, grew up a Sabbath fan. It's one of the first things that I listened to as a kid that got me into heavy metal. It also got me in. It was very much integral to my uh, just one of the most vivid memories that I had as a child. That also got me into wrestling. Seeing the Road Warriors, which I've mentioned 1,000 times if I mentioned once, my favorite tag team of all time. Watching them come to the ring and that heavy metal aesthetic combined with playing Iron Man and beating the shit out of people. It was just, it was so heavily cemented in my mind as a child that it led me to the point where this is what I wanted to do with my life. This is where I wanted to take my life. I wanted to get into wrestling ever since I was a kid. And it's just, to me, it's interesting how the two worlds kind of came together, coalesced, and it kind of led me down the path for that I went down, good, bad, or indifferent, depending on who you're asking. And honestly, depending on what day you're asking me. But yeah, it was just, I got into Sabbath real young. My cousin was a huge, like, old school heavy metal fan, loved Sabbath, the Scorpions, uh, Kiss, stuff like that. And that's all the different type of stuff that I got into at a young age. My sister liked a lot of hair band stuff, so Motley Crue, AC/DC, although they're not hair band, but you get where I'm going with this. All the hair band stuff, Bon Jovi, stuff like that. It's just all the stuff that I grew up on, and then eventually and gradually got into the heavier stuff as time went on. But Sabbath was the gateway for me, as it was for a lot of people. And then, of course, you get into Ozzy and his solo stuff. And I can remember as a kid, probably dating back to seventh or eighth grade, having a copy of No More Tears on cassette and loaning it to some dirtbag with a red afro and being a kind kid trying to spread the love. And then the jackass never gave me my tape back. So I used to have an OG copy of No More Tears, but somebody lifted it on me after I was trying to be nice and letting them listen to it. So that was that. But yeah, man, I mean, Ozzy was such inspiration to so many people in so many different ways. What kind of like spurred me on to do this was I was watching a podcast or whatever you want to call them, live stream show that one of these shows that I watch on YouTube and Rumble, and they were talking about it, and they were just kind of being dicks about it. And I know that their shtick is that they're comedians, but at the same time, they're just being just being knobs about it. Just being edgy boy for the sake of being edgy boy, and it's just. I'm not like personally offended, like, consider me unsubscribed or anything like that. But it was just like, bro, if you don't know what you're talking about, then just leave it alone. Just leave it alone. You don't have to comment just to bash, just bashing things to bash things, you know, doing like rage bait shit just to do rage bait shit, but then saying that, oh, I'm not doing this to rage bait. I'm doing this because it's my opinion. Well, it's like, well, and your opinion is dog shit because the one dude was like, well, uh, Ozzy's the most overrated vocalist in the history of music, which is like, really? I mean, here's my thing with Ozzy. Ozzy, if you're talking from a technical technique, vocal technique, pipes, and all that sort of thing, as a vocalist, as a singer, no, he was not the greatest vocalist in the world. Probably not even, if you're doing it just on technique, probably not even in the top 10. I mean, frankly, as far as that goes, his technique, especially live, you could put him in a Vince Neil category as far as he was hit and miss and not very good to begin with. You could rank so many. I mean, of course, Dio, in my opinion, greatest vocalist that ever lived. I'd say you put Messiah from Candlemass up there, Robert Lowe from Solitude Eternus, Matt Barlow from Iced Earth, and a couple. Of course, Rob Halford from Priest. And probably just a ton of others. Biff from Saxon, even though I'm not a huge Saxon guy, but definitely appreciate the vocals. And there's just so many guys technically that were better, but with him, with Ozzy, his iconic status within metal. First, it starts with Sabbath and starting the whole genre. There is no metal without Sabbath. Anybody who tells you anything different is that they're just either being inflammatory for the sake of it, or they just don't know what they're talking about. But Ozzy had that unmistakable voice. That warble, that wail to his voice. It wasn't technically proficient, but it just worked. It worked with Sabbath. It worked with his solo stuff. It's such an iconic voice that it's unmistakable, an undeniable sound to his voice. And even though it wasn't great at times, you knew when you heard Ozzy, you knew it was Ozzy. You know what I mean? That's kind of the thing with him. And so the importance of being, starting heavy metal and that voice, his stage presence, his maniacal offstage antics, they're the stuff of legend. I'm sure a movie's going to come out about him and they're going to, either exaggerate a ton of shit that happened in his life. But I mean, getting banned from the Alamo, snorting ants and snorting his own urine and stuff like that. Just a maniac biting the heads off of doves and bats and all the crazy horse shit that he was doing when he was all hopped up on drugs. And that was another thing is too is oh, he was a junkie. It's like, all right, let's get something straight here. If you're an internet personality, most internet personalities are degenerates and dog shit human beings. These are the last people on the planet that should be talking about being junkies and stuff like that, because so many of them are, they're all drug, not all of them, but so many of them are drug addicts and rely way too heavily on weed and pills and stuff like that, drink to excess. There's some of them that gotten involved in freaking polyamorous relationships that have blown up in their faces and getting arrested and doing also revenge porn and charges and stuff like it. So it's like, come on now, let's be let's stick within the realms of reality here and not throw stones, because most people who are internet personalities who ask people to give them money to make a living should not be talking crap about anybody and their shortcomings in life. So I would say that too. But going back to the real topic at hand, the meat of the topic at hand, yeah, he was just unmistakable uh, unmistakable presence, force within heavy metal and music in general. Granted, conversely, there's a lot to not like about Ozzy and his career, his backstory. He was an absolute ruthless colostomy bag to a lot of people, both he and his wife. You can't put all of it on his wife because he was right there with her. They were terrible to Bob Daisley, terrible to Lee Kirschlake, rotten to Jakey Lee. So many people that came and went in the band who did not get the credit that they deserved. Ozzy never wrote a single thing. Everything in Sabbath, all the iconic material. Grant, like I said, set aside the fact that he was the iconic voice behind the songs. At the same time, he never wrote anything. They were Iommi and Butler were very gracious in giving him credit on a lot of stuff, but he never wrote a single thing. Same thing with his solo career. So it's and then to like ice people out and not give them the credit that they deserved. That's garbage. That's just a sleazy move, totally unnecessary. There's even at the whole Back to the Beginning show, so many people that didn't get invited. The whole they pretend, Sharon Osbourne and Ozzy pretending like every iteration of Sabbath did not exist after him, like there was nothing besides him. Is just, just stupid. I mean, the Dio years were great, the Tony Martin years were great, the stuff with Ian Gillan was good. Freaking, I can't remember the other the I can't think of the name off the top of my head. The other guy that was in the band, but Glenn Hughes. I need to take a break for my mind to work for a second. But yes, just stuff like that. So he wasn't all, he wasn't just like, yeah, he's the greatest guy that ever lived. No, he had his issues. A lot of which related to his drug and alcohol abuse. Uh, Elevating his children in a reality show was kind of, I could have done without that. Definitely his kids are, they're just celebrity kids. You can't fault. They live in this weird Hollywood echo chamber and bubble. So it is what it is. But yeah, stuff like that, and then, but yeah, just hearing about it, I got, got a ton of people, people mention it to me in a group chat with a bunch of the fellows from the metal YouTube, and they mentioned it to me while I was at work, and I see it, and it was like, ah, shit. But yeah, it happened like what, like 2 weeks after the Back to the Beginning show. So I guess there's speculation about how he died, how he passed. Maybe it was an assisted thing, that he just wanted to go out on his own terms. I don't know, and I'm sure that may or may not come out in the future. But it is what it is. It's just wild that 2 weeks after the show, after his last show, he's dead. So, I would say he's probably right now they're in hell with Lemmy as the mediator, and Satan is trying to mediate. He's trying to work out a peace accord between him and Dio for who's sitting at the left side of the throne next to friggin' Little Nicky or something. But yeah, man. So that's my those my thoughts on Ozzy. As scatterbrained as they are, and then today, then I get my phone around noon today, it just starts blowing up, and I swear I never get this many messages, so I knew something was up. And it was just bing, 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 phone ringing, bing, bing. And it's just, did you hear? Did you hear? Did you hear? And then I mentioned, the same group chat. I mentioned it to a couple people there, and we started chatting back and forth. And first one's my brother. Texts me and tells me Hulk Hogan died, and I was like, what? And then so I go and I look, and sure enough, I see a live stream from a Fox News Philly affiliate, and they're talking about it on TMZ or something. And yeah, yeah, Hulk Hogan passed away today on Thursday, the 24th. I guess he had a cardiac arrest. He had a heart attack. I think I'm not quite sure if this is corroborated or not, but I guess he had a heart valve replacement surgery and it just wasn't taken. and that contributed to it. But I'm sure a lot of whatever heart issues, cardiovascular issues he was having are certainly related to him being on the road and the grind of the lifestyle. Some certain choices that you make when being at the top of the game for as long and as hard as he was. I mean, but as far as his, I don't have to go into a whole history lesson of Hogan either. I mean, a ton of people are going to do it, but his his impact on the wrestling business is undeniable. Again, unmistakable. Just another iconic figure within his industry. If there was no Hulk Hogan in the 80s, there is no pro wrestling at the level that it is today. A lot of people, and I'll get into this a little bit more in a sec, but a lot of people want to shit on him now because of all the leaked footage and audio that they heard from that video where he was plowing Bubba the Love Sponge's wife, and Bubba was doing whatever, sleazy horse shit that he was doing to try and leverage Hogan, his big buddy. But now then he's sitting there cucking out to him, but at the same time secretly filming him, and then all the stuff comes out about his opinions on the on people and on black people and stuff like that. And it really just roasted his career. A lot of people never looked at him the same again. But we'll get into that in a second. But yeah, he started out in the Florida area. He was a Florida guy, Tampa guy, Tampa St. Pete Clearwater guy. Trained with Hiro Matsuda originally, and there's a story about how he went to the school to learn how to wrestle. And back when Hogan got into the business, it wasn't like it is when I got into the business, where you just pay your tuition, you go to a school, reputable or otherwise. They train you, and you either survive, you either sink or you swim, and then you go into the business and you either sink or you swim, or you take whatever path you take down the road, and it leads you to wherever it might lead you. But when he got in, it was much harder. It was a much more insulated, much more closed off industry. The barrier of entry was extremely low. You either had to be a pro athlete or a family member, or there just had to be something special about you. So when he went in, there was a story that Hiro Matsuda broke his ankle, or somebody did. They jumped on his ankle. They had him get in referee's position and stomped on his ankle and broke it, just to see if he would come back, and he did. And yeah, he transitioned into, he was Terry Boulder, real name Terry Bollea, but he ended up being Terry Boulder. Eventually took on the Hulk Hogan persona, and he went to AWA with it, American Wrestling Association in Minnesota. Back in the 80s, 70s, and 80s in particular, AWA was a huge territory run by Vern Gagne. So many notable people came out of the Minnesota area. Road Warriors, Kurt Hennig, his father, Rick Rude, uh, Barry Darsow, Demolition Smash. There's Jerry Blackwell was there for a short time. Rick Martel was there at one point. Just so many talented people came through the AWA, and Hogan was one of them. I think the Iron Sheik was there at one point. Just a ton of people. Bobby Heenan was there, and Mean Gene Okerlund was there. It was a big territory. It was the number 3 company in the country at the time. And Hogan at one point was the guy. He got really famous in the when around this time, because he played a role in Rocky 3 as Thunder Lips, the ultimate male. And he worked with Stallone. They did the scene with the charity event, and he started throwing him around. And it's probably the first time I ever saw Hogan throw a suplex, just screaming the whole time, "It's all fake, meatball, all fake. How about this?" And it was great, just very, very memorable, if you can't tell. And yeah, and then he eventually, like a lot of people did, Vince got a hold of him, and between the two of them, Vince's genius and Hogan's charisma, they pretty much took wrestling to levels that have not been seen since. I mean, so many iconic moments, so many memorable moments. just the crowds and the enthusiasm for being a wrestling fan and wrestling at the time was off the charts. I personally, as a kid growing up watching wrestling and then eventually getting into it, I was never a fan. I was never a huge fan of Hulk Hogan's. I was one of those kids who always loved the heels more. I always loved seeing Bobby Heenan's family trying to get one over on Hogan. I never was like a big Hulkamaniac, but it was one of those deals that you just can't deny what the man did for wrestling. I mean, it was something to behold. The slam heard around the world with him and Andre at WrestleMania 3 selling out the Pontiac Silverdome. You know, that really was the moment that made him. I mean, you had him becoming the champ when he beat Iron Sheik, and Sheik was the transitional champion after Bob Backlund was there. He was the champ. They put it on Sheik so they could put it on Hogan because they didn't want to have the two faces collide. And then he got that belt and they put the rocket ship on him, headlining WrestleMania 1 with Mr. T against Orton and Piper, or Orndorff and Piper, excuse me, and Orton in the as a second for him. They had Jimmy Snuka was second, and uh, Hogan and Mr. T. Pat Patterson was the ref. Freaking Liberace was the timekeeper, and just all the pomp and circumstance and pageantry that was WrestleMania 1. That was all Vince's idea, but it was all put on the back of Hulk Hogan. I mean, you can't deny it. WrestleMania 2, him and Bundy in the cage, and then once they got to WrestleMania 3, the build up to it was just off the chain. Just an amazing, like, you got Andre turning heel. Andre the Giant was always like a beloved babyface character, larger than life, the eighth wonder of the world. You know, just he was always just a good guy. He was always like a heroic figure within the wrestling industry, and to have him turn like he did, it was a big moment, as in the wrestling business, as a kid watching it. It was just, and then just the lead up, joining up with Bobby Heenan of all people, it was just like, it was insane. And this all led to that WrestleMania 3 match at the Pontiac Silverdome. And yeah, and then just so many classic moments after that event. Then they had like the years where, again, I said I'm not going to get no history lesson, but I guess I kind of am a little bit, but then they had the years after where wrestling started to lose its popularity a little bit, because wrestling goes peaks and valleys. It's always got it's like it's a 7 year cycles that it has at times. But then he eventually, in the mid 90s, he went to WCW, which was WWE's main competitor. And he was doing the red and yellow gimmick for the longest, and it just wasn't hitting like it did in WWF. It was a completely different animal over there, just a completely different vibe, completely different crowd. The style in NWA compared to WWE was just a different thing, and that didn't match. And the times changed. It was a different time. Where in the '80s, it was a lot more real American resonated with fans, with wrestling fans, and with the country. It's definitely a lot more patriotic, a lot more pro America, rah rah, sis boom bah, stars and stripes kind of stuff. So the training, the bears, and the vitamins, brother, that all worked back then. But by the time you got to the '90s with like the Gen X, my generation, and the cynicism and the nihilism and all the things that came with it, and the grunge hitting and everything just becoming a lot darker. It was just, he needed to reinvent himself, and when the NWO became a thing, Hall and Nash coming over and doing this whole invasion angle that they stole from Japan, but him joining it and becoming a heel, and after so many decades as a hero, it was unreal, and they got such heat for it, and it just blew up. I mean, to the point where they almost killed WWE. And yeah, he reinvented himself, and then added years to his career after that. And then conversely, they went to TNA. He did other stuff in the business. Eventually went back to WWF, did a bunch of stuff with them, worked with a bunch of name talent like Angle, The Rock, all these different guys. I don't know if he did anything with Austin off the top of my head, but worked with a lot of different talent. I think he worked with Brock Lesnar, but then he kind of floundered and was basically like indie purgatory, working with TNA and doing all that sort of stuff, and basically just siphoning people for money. At that point, he just went into like carny grifter mode, which a lot of veteran guys who are name talent, that's what they do. At one point, he had his own promotion that he was running here in Sanford, Florida. And hold on, I'll show it to you. So this was the XWF, and it had a lot of name talent that weren't working for WCW. This was around the time where a lot of talent were they were all kind of like, again, a lot of guys, once WCW went out of business, they were stuck in indie purgatory, and a lot of guys lived in the Florida area, so you'd get a lot of the companies that I work for, you get a lot of WCW talent were working for them. That's how I wound up working with Prince Iaukea. That's how I wound up working with John Tenta and a bunch of other guys. But Florida's a hotbed for wrestling. Most everybody lives down here. It's a place. So they mixed a lot of the old and younger up and coming talent from that era, and they did a bunch of episodes, and it just never hit. It was just something that never really broke. So it just kind of got lost in the shuffle, but they made a DVD of it, and I picked it up, and some of it's all right. Some of it is just like it's just indie stuff with name talent is basically what it is. But that was between him leaving, between WCW shutting down and going back to WWF, WWE. And so we'll move on to the controversies here. So, like I say, he got into a lot of trouble for his comments that were made when he was recorded secretly. He was sleeping with Bubba the Love Sponge, who's a local radio personality. He's like the Tampa version of Howard Stern, just the shock jock dude. Talks like this. He talks like every other radio shock jock hack DJ that you've ever seen in the world. It's kind of a mix of Alex Jones and Mancow and every other hack radio personality that you've ever seen in the world. That's Bubba the Love Sponge. Bubba's kind of in my opinion, he's a douchebag. He is. I used to listen to him on 98 Rock when I first moved to Tampa, and it was kind of cool back then. But then he just, started being edgy for the sake of being edgy, and it doesn't work. And he's been bouncing from different station to station, but he was always friends with Hogan, and he'd always put over that fact to anyone who would listen. And he was actually, I'm bouncing around a little bit, but he was actually somebody down here that was telling people that something was going on with him, that he was knocking on death's door, and nobody really believed him because he's such a bullshit artist that it's like, he's the cry wolf guy. So nobody was really listening to him, but it turns out he was right. So, I guess, great. But yeah, at one point Hogan was sleeping with his wife, and he was secretly filming it, and those tapes eventually leaked out, and a lot of unsavory comments that Hogan had to make about black people and their relations to his daughter were coming out, and it just buried him with a lot of people. And it didn't help that they tried to do a whole like mea culpa tour with him, and the best he would come up with was don't get secretly filmed, watch what you're saying because you might be getting recorded. And while that's fine, it's like, okay, but also maybe don't just frivolously throw the N bomb around. I don't know. Maybe he thought like with Booker T calling him one back in the day, maybe he thought he had an N word pass from the brothers and the homies, but I don't know. I don't know what he was thinking there, and I don't. I think a lot of people thought he was racist, and that's stuck with him the last few years. And then you get into the whole political thing where he started supporting Donald Trump in this lead up to the last election, and that just cemented, and a lot of people who kind of fish out of the left side of the boat, so to speak, that cemented their opinions on him, that he's just a piece of garbage, a racist Nazi, this, that, and the other thing. And I don't think he's any, maybe the racist thing. I don't know. I didn't know his heart. I didn't, and I'm sure someone make your jokes, but uh, yeah, I don't know. I mean, I know there's plenty of people in the business who were black people who said that Hogan did a lot to help them. There's others who felt like he kept him down, but at the same time, that was one of the bad things about him. But besides, he was a serial liar. I know you're not supposed to speak ill of the dead, but this is all part of his story. So I'm not really that concept is kind of antiquated to me because it's part of the story. What are you gonna do? You're never gonna say all the bad stuff about people. This is part of what makes you who you are. I'm sure when I'm dead and buried, someone's gonna talk shit about me, about some of the stuff that I've said or done or whatever the case is. There's always there. It's part of it. But yeah, a lot of people they start frowning on him because of that. Really turned on him because of that. The constant grifting of like with all the shilling of stuff that he did and all, but that's all like kind of like small potato stuff. But I think really the main thing was the comments and just very very lackluster defense of himself, or what people considered was him prostrating himself, genuflecting enough to the people that he was supposed to. So take that for what it is. I don't know enough about the situation to really offer up a learned opinion. Again, I wasn't in his head. I'm not, I don't know his heart. I didn't know his heart, so I couldn't really tell you what he thought on these things. But he famously came back recently and the crowd booed him mercilessly in Los Angeles, which is like, why would you bring him to Los Angeles? That's just like stupid. If you're gonna have him anywhere. And then people said, well, he was in Florida and they booed him there too. And it's just like the WWE wrestling fan base nowadays is not the same fan base that it was years ago. It wasn't. It's This isn't the Attitude Era fan base. And I know it's an overused term, but this is the woke PG. Everything has to be, it's all got to be DEI inclusive. Everything is sensitive. Everybody needs to be elevated for whatever box they check and that sort of stuff. It's corporate, and nowadays corporate is of that mindset. So it's not out of the realm of understanding that this is how a multinational corporation would run its business nowadays. It's not the same thing where you can do some of the stuff that you did back in the day on WWE television. You couldn't have DX doing blackface mocking the Nation of Domination on pro wrestling television today. They'd get crucified. They'd get thrown off the air. TKO would have an absolute. Ari Emanuel would have an absolute. He'd have a fit. He'd like lose his mind, and they would tank the business. But yeah, I'm kind of going off the rails a little bit here, but yeah, he just he was, yeah, he was an icon. I mean, both him and Ozzy, to kind of like tie a bow on all this. They were both unmistakable, undeniable titans of their industry. There would be no pro wrestling without Hulk Hogan. There would be no heavy metal without Ozzy. So I would say, before closing out here, raise your glasses. I know this isn't anything strong, it's just a protein drink, but cheers. Moment of silence. Throw them horns way up for both guys. Just legends. Legends never die. And, yeah, it's a sad day. It sucks. It's just, again, another part. It just reminds you of the finite amount of time that you have on this earth. That eventually we're all gonna die. We're all gonna get older. As we get older, you're gonna lose pieces of what was your past and your life, and it's never fun. But you just kind of just keep trucking. Not to sound like a hippie, you just keep moving forward. Bite down on your mouth guard and keep swinging. And as far as like an inspirational thing, that's the best I got for you. But Yeah, man, it was just, and I'm wearing this now, but honestly, I'm probably gonna take it off when I leave here. First of all, because it's getting a little bit sweaty, because it's hot as balls here in Florida. But at the same time, I don't want a bunch of people coming up to me and going, "Oh yeah, man, that Ozzy dying, that was a real shame. I really like that Mama, I'm Coming Home song." It's like, ugh. I don't really want to deal with a bunch of normie type people trying to relate to me as a music fan. But at the same time, I would say if you're a metalhead out there and you're wearing stuff and you see this and you're trying to like you're repping some Ozzy or Sabbath stuff, and people come up to you, don't be a dick to them. They're trying to be polite, but as a general rule, I'm gonna still have some metal shit on because that's what I wear. That's what I'm more comfortable in when I'm not in my work clothes. But if anyone comes up and talks to you and they're trying to relate, and I would say just don't be a dick to them. I'm never a dick to people most of the time, I would say, but I just kind of I might be, oh yeah, 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 oh yeah, it's sad. But if somebody seems a little bit more learned on the subject, then I'll probably talk to them. But yeah, man. So rest in peace, Ozzy. Rest in peace, Hulk Hogan. This has been a shit week. Uh, Poor Theo Huxtable, poor Malcolm Jamal Warner. It was just like people really weren't paying attention to him, and then Hulk Hogan dies, and now nobody's gonna give a crap that he died. So yeah, Theo Huxtable died too. So I guess if nothing else, maybe we don't have to worry about Arnold at this moment in time. But yeah, it sucks. And I was thinking too, everybody always says like, "Oh yeah, they're in heaven with like Ozzy's in heaven with Dio and Lemmy and this one and that one and Randy Rhodes and so on and so forth." And I was thinking that I was taking that point and kind of extrapolating it to Hogan, and it made me sad a little bit because I got thinking of all the people that were such a big part of my childhood. Oh, he's probably in heaven with Macho Man, Mean Gene, Bobby the Brain, Paul Orndorff, The Ultimate Warrior, Rick Rude, The Junkyard Dog, Dynamite Kid, The Missing Link, Kamala. It keeps going. It's like, when does it Gorilla Monsoon? It's just, it never ends. So many people that I loved as wrestling people are gone. They're dead and buried, and hey, at least Ricky Steamboat's still here. So, I guess that's a good thing. But yeah, man. So yeah, that's what I got for you. I've been babbling on way too long. So I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you enjoy my rambling, babbling opinion on Hulk Hogan and Ozzy Osbourne. You're gonna see 1,000 of these things, but if you take the time to watch this, I certainly appreciate it. I'm gonna have more positive stuff coming up here. I had another video I'm gonna do about some recommendations, which I thought was pretty cool. Anyone who's watching my shit, I appreciate it. I really do. Anyone who's taken the time to watch my stuff, anybody who's taken the time to signal boost my channel or mention it in any capacity, I really appreciate it. I like doing these things. I like, engaging with people, even if it's just on the internet. And it's, I enjoy it. So again, thank you, everybody. Appreciate you. Um, and yeah, man, I'm gonna go do my domestic stuff for the rest of the day. Got my workout in and got in a kind of a meal, and yeah, go finish up what I'm doing, and then I don't know, I'll probably bang on the guitar for a few minutes today and just kind of, I don't know, maybe I'll try to learn Iron Man or something. All right, gang. As always, this is Moonshine. This has been Moonshine talking. Stay sick, stay heavy, stay brutal. Always tuck your chin upon impact. Don't forget to breathe. Everyone, take it easy. Have a good one. I'll catch you on the next one. Later.